The parking lot was dimly lit, and Sarah Mitchell walked toward her car after another long day at the defense contractor's office. At 32, she looked like any other professional woman heading home from work. Medium height, athletic build hidden under a business suit, brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Nothing about her appearance suggested she could kill a man with her bare hands in 12 different ways. 3 men emerged from between the parked cars, blocking her path. The leader, a tall man with military tattoos covering his arms, stepped forward with a sneer. "Well, what do we have here?" he said, his voice dripping with menace. "Little Miss Pentagon thinks she can waltz into our territory and take our jobs?" Sarah's eyes swept the scene in milliseconds. 3 attackers, no witnesses, multiple escape routes, potential weapons within reach. Her heart rate remained steady at 60 beats per minute. Years of training had taught her that panic was the enemy, and she had learned to treat danger like an old friend. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said calmly, her voice betraying nothing of the tactical assessment running through her mind. The second man, shorter but stockier, laughed harshly. "No misunderstanding, lady. You cost us $1 million contract. Someone needs to teach you a lesson about staying in your lane." What these men didn't know was that Sarah Mitchell wasn't just any defense contractor. Hidden beneath her civilian exterior lay a secret that only a handful of people in the world knew. She was one of the first women to successfully complete Navy SEAL training, a warrior forged in the crucible of the world's most elite military unit. As the third man reached into his jacket, Sarah realized that her carefully constructed civilian life was about to collide with her warrior past. The question wasn't whether she could handle 3 untrained thugs. It was whether she could do it without revealing who she really was. But sometimes, the mask has to come off. Sarah Mitchell had spent the last 3 years perfecting the art of being invisible. After leaving the Navy, she had deliberately chosen a quiet life, working as a senior analyst for Meridian Defense Solutions, a mid-sized contractor specializing in logistics and supply chain management. It was exactly the kind of boring, behind-the-scenes work that kept her out of the spotlight and far from the classified world she once inhabited. Every morning, she woke up in her modest townhouse in Arlington, Virginia, made coffee in her small kitchen, and drove her reliable Honda Civic to an office building that looked like every other office building in the Washington, D.C. area. She wore conservative business attire, kept her conversations professional but friendly, and made sure never to stand out in any way that might invite questions about her background. Her colleagues knew her as the quiet woman who always delivered excellent work on time, had an unusual ability to spot potential problems in complex logistics networks, and occasionally demonstrated an uncanny knowledge of military equipment specifications. If anyone wondered why she seemed to know so much about specialized gear or why she never talked about her past, they kept those questions to themselves. The truth was that Sarah Mitchell was living a carefully constructed lie. Her real name was Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, former Navy SEAL Team 6 operator, veteran of classified missions across 3 continents, and holder of commendations she could never publicly acknowledge. She had been part of the first experimental program to integrate women into the SEALs, a program so secret that officially it had never existed. 3 years ago, after completing her final mission, Sarah had been given a choice that no SEAL had ever faced before. The program was being discontinued due to political pressure, and the few women who had made it through could either accept new identities and blend into civilian life, or face the possibility of their existence being exposed in congressional hearings that could destroy their lives and compromise national security. Sarah chose invisibility. She chose the safety of anonymity over the recognition she had earned through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. She chose to let the world believe that women could never make it through SEAL training, while she quietly proved them wrong every single day just by existing. The transition hadn't been easy. Going from leading special operations missions to analyzing shipping manifests felt like trying to breathe underwater. Her body, trained to peak physical condition, ached for real challenge. Her mind, sharpened by life-or-death decisions, felt dulled by the routine of civilian bureaucracy. But she had adapted, as SEALs always do. She found small ways to stay sharp. Morning runs that looked like casual fitness, but were actually tactical movement exercises. martial arts classes, where she carefully held back her true capabilities, weekend hiking trips that were really reconnaissance training in disguise. She maintained her edge while appearing completely ordinary. The deception extended to every aspect of her life. She had learned to laugh at action movies that got everything wrong about military operations. She nodded politely when men explained basic concepts she could have taught at an advanced level. She listened to office complaints about minor inconveniences without mentioning that she once went 72 hours without sleep while tracking high-value targets through hostile territory. Her apartment reflected this careful normalcy. Visitors would see tasteful furniture, a small collection of books about business and travel, and a few generic photos of landscapes. They wouldn't notice the reinforced locks, the security cameras hidden in everyday objects, or the fact that every room had multiple exit strategies. They certainly wouldn't find the sealed storage unit across town where she kept items from her previous life. At Meridian Defense Solutions, Sarah had quickly established herself as invaluable. Her ability to spot inefficiencies in complex systems wasn't just analytical skill. It was the result of years spent planning operations where every detail could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. When she reviewed supply chain proposals, she instinctively looked for vulnerabilities that could be exploited by hostile forces. When she analyzed transportation routes, she automatically identified ambush points and security weaknesses. Her supervisor, Tom Bradley, was a former Army logistics officer who appreciated her thoroughness without quite understanding its source. "Sarah has this amazing ability to see around corners," he often told clients. "She spots problems that wouldn't occur to most people until it's too late." If only he knew that her training had literally involved learning to see around corners, using mirrors and periscopes to identify threats without exposing herself to enemy fire. The contract that would change everything started like any other. Meridian had been competing for a major logistics support deal with a company called Titan Solutions. The contract involved managing supply lines for military bases in Eastern Europe, work that required security clearances and deep understanding of operational requirements. Sarah had spent weeks analyzing the proposal, identifying potential cost savings and efficiency improvements that could give Meridian a competitive edge. She had worked late nights and weekends poring over technical specifications and requirement documents. Her recommendations were brilliant, innovative, and exactly the kind of strategic thinking that won contracts. When Meridian's proposal was accepted over Titan's significantly higher bid, Sarah felt a quiet satisfaction. It was a victory achieved through intelligence and skill rather than firepower, but a victory nonetheless. She had helped her company succeed while maintaining her carefully constructed cover. What she didn't know was that Titan Solutions wasn't just another defense contractor. The company was owned by Marcus Rivera, a former Marine whose military career had ended in disgrace after a training accident that killed 2 soldiers under his command. Rivera blamed his downfall on what he called politically correct policies that were making the military soft. He had particular hatred for initiatives that opened elite units to women, convinced that such programs compromised operational effectiveness. When Rivera learned that his company had lost a $1 million contract to Meridian, his anger focused on Sarah Mitchell. His contacts in the industry told him that she had been the architect of Meridian's winning proposal. In his twisted worldview, a woman had stolen what rightfully belonged to him. Rivera began investigating Sarah's background, looking for ammunition he could use to discredit her work or get her fired. What he found puzzled him. Her employment history before joining Meridian was surprisingly sparse. Her college records showed excellent grades but no extracurricular activities. Her social media presence was minimal and generic. For someone working in the defense industry, she seemed to have remarkably little background in military affairs. This lack of information only fueled Rivera's paranoia. He became convinced that Sarah was part of some conspiracy, possibly involving foreign interests trying to manipulate defense contracts. He shared his theories with 2 men who worked for him, Danny Torres, a former Army mechanic with anger management issues, and Rick Coleman, an ex-cop who had been fired for excessive force. Together, they decided that Sarah Mitchell needed to be taught a lesson about interfering with their business. They began following her, learning her routines, looking for an opportunity to confront her somewhere private. They convinced themselves they were protecting national security by investigating this mysterious woman who had appeared from nowhere to cost them money. None of them realized they were about to make the biggest mistake of their lives. On the evening, it all came apart. Sarah had stayed late at the office to finish a report on ammunition transport protocols. As she walked to her car in the poorly lit parking garage, her trained senses immediately detected that something was wrong. The echo of footsteps that stopped when she stopped, the subtle change in air pressure that suggested people moving behind cover, the faint smell of cigarette smoke in a non-smoking building. She continued walking normally while her mind shifted into tactical mode. 3 individuals, based on the footstep patterns, moving to intercept her route to the car, attempting to use the element of surprise. Amateur-level coordination and positioning. Sarah calculated her options in the few seconds before they revealed themselves. She could attempt to avoid confrontation by altering her route, but that would only delay the inevitable if they were determined to pursue her. She could call for help, but security response time in the building was at least 5 minutes. She could run, but her heels and business suit would limit her mobility. Or she could handle the situation the way she had been trained to handle threats. The way she had handled threats in Yemen, Afghanistan, and places that didn't officially exist on any map. When the 3 men stepped out to block her path, Sarah realized that her 3 years of careful invisibility were about to end. The question was no longer whether she could maintain her cover. The question was how much of her true capabilities she would have to reveal to survive the next few minutes. The confrontation in the parking garage unfolded exactly as Sarah's training had taught her to expect from untrained aggressors. Marcus Rivera's men were operating on anger and assumptions, not strategy or skill. They had positioned themselves poorly, blocking their own escape routes while giving her multiple options. They were bunched together, making it impossible for all 3 to engage simultaneously. Most importantly, they had underestimated their target so completely that they might as well have been trying to intimidate a sleeping tiger. Sarah kept her hands visible and her voice calm as she attempted de-escalation. This wasn't mercy, it was tactics. Every second they spent talking was time for her to assess their weapons, their positioning, and their intentions. The leader, Torres, carried himself like former military, but had developed the soft edges of someone who hadn't maintained his training. The shorter one, Coleman, had the aggressive posture of someone used to intimidating civilians. The third man, who she would later learn was Rivera himself, stayed slightly back, letting others do the talking while he watched. "Gentlemen, I think there's been a misunderstanding," Sarah said, her tone professional and unthreatening. Inside her mind, tactical protocols were activating automatically. Target assessment complete. Threat level moderate but escalating. Rules of engagement unclear. Civilian law applied, but lethal force authorized if life threatened. Torres stepped closer, his hand moving toward something under his jacket. "No misunderstanding, lady. You cost us big money with your fancy report, and now you're going to pay for it." Sarah's enhanced peripheral vision caught the movement of Torres's hand and Coleman's shift to flank her left side. These were the micro-movements that preceded violence, patterns she had studied and experienced in real combat situations. Her heart rate remained steady, but her muscles began the subtle preparation for explosive action. "I'm just an analyst," she said, taking a half-step back that looked like retreat but actually improved her tactical position. "I write reports. I don't make contracting decisions." "Don't play dumb with us," Coleman snarled, moving closer from her left. "We know you're the one who sabotaged our proposal. What are you, some kind of foreign agent? Chinese? Russian?" The accusation was so absurd that Sarah almost smiled. If they knew who she really was, they would realize that questioning her loyalty to the United States was like questioning whether water was wet. She had bled for this country in places most Americans couldn't find on a map. She had sacrificed her identity, her recognition, and her future so that others could sleep safely in their beds. But their ignorance was about to become dangerous. Rivera finally spoke from his position behind the other 2 men. "Search her," he ordered. "Check for weapons, recording devices, anything that proves what she really is." Torres reached toward her, and Sarah knew the talking phase was over. She had hoped to resolve this without violence, not out of concern for their well-being, but because any physical altercation would inevitably lead to questions about her background. Once people started asking how a civilian analyst could handle multiple attackers, her carefully constructed cover would begin to unravel. But she wasn't going to let strange men put their hands on her. regardless of the consequences. Sarah moved with the fluid precision of someone who had performed similar actions thousands of times in training and dozens of times in real combat. Her right hand intercepted Torres's reaching arm, redirecting it downward while her left elbow drove upward into his solar plexus. The strike was perfectly calibrated, hard enough to fold him in half and take him out of the fight, but not hard enough to cause permanent damage. As Torres collapsed, gasping for breath, Coleman reached for what Sarah now saw was a telescoping baton. She pivoted on her left foot, her right leg sweeping his feet out from under him. He went down hard, his head striking the concrete with a sound that echoed through the garage. Rivera, shocked by the sudden collapse of his intimidation plan, fumbled for a pistol he had concealed under his jacket. This changed everything. The appearance of a firearm meant Sarah was legally justified in using lethal force, but it also meant that her response would be scrutinized by police, investigators, and potentially federal authorities. She closed the distance between them faster than Rivera's panicked mind could process. Her left hand clamped down on his wrist, preventing him from drawing the weapon, while her right delivered a precise strike to a nerve cluster in his neck. Rivera's entire right side went numb, and the gun clattered to the ground. Sarah controlled his descent to the pavement, ensuring he didn't hit his head on the concrete. She retrieved the firearm, ejected the magazine, and cleared the chamber with movements so practiced they looked like a magic trick. Only then did she step back and assess the situation. 3 men down, 1 unconscious, 1 semi-conscious and groaning, 1 paralyzed on his right side but alert. No serious injuries. No permanent damage. No fatalities. It had taken less than 15 seconds from first contact to complete tactical control of the situation. The problem was that no civilian analyst should have been able to do what she had just done. Her actions had been too precise, too efficient, too professional. She had just demonstrated capabilities that would inevitably lead to questions she couldn't answer. Sarah pulled out her phone and dialed 911, knowing that she had perhaps 10 minutes before police arrived to decide how to handle the aftermath. She could claim self-defense, which was legally accurate. She could say she had taken some martial arts classes, which was technically true if you considered SEAL combat training a form of martial arts. She could hope that the 3 men would be too embarrassed to admit they had been defeated by a woman to press charges. But even as she planned her cover story, Sarah knew that her time as an invisible civilian was ending. Someone would investigate. Someone would ask questions. Someone would eventually connect Sarah Mitchell, mysterious defense contractor, to the classified programs that officially never existed. While she waited for the police, Torres began to regain consciousness. He looked up at her with a mixture of pain, confusion, and growing anger. "Who are you?" he wheezed, still struggling to breathe normally. Sarah looked down at him, weighing her options. She could continue the deception, maintain her cover, and hope that nobody dug too deeply into the incident, or she could give him a taste of the truth, enough to make him understand that he had made a terrible mistake. "I'm someone you should have left alone," she said quietly. Rivera, his speech slurred by the nerve damage, managed to speak. "You're going to regret this. We'll find out who you really are. We'll expose you." Sarah knelt beside him, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. "Rivera, I know exactly who you are. Former Marine Sergeant, discharged under other than honorable conditions after the training incident at Camp Lejeune that killed Lance Corporal Martinez and Private First Class Johnson. You've spent the last 8 years blaming everyone else for your failures, and building a business that profits from the sacrifice of better men and women than you'll ever be." Rivera's eyes widened in shock. There was no way a civilian defense contractor should know those details about his military service. "Now you're going to listen carefully," Sarah continued, her voice carrying an authority that made Rivera instinctively want to follow orders. "You and your friends are going to tell the police that this was a misunderstanding. You're going to apologize for threatening me, and you're never going to come near me or my workplace again. Because if you continue to investigate my background, you might not like what you find." The sound of approaching sirens filled the garage. Sarah stood and smoothed her business suit, checking her appearance in the reflection of a car window. Her hair was slightly disheveled, and there was a small scuff on her shoe, but otherwise she looked like what she was supposed to be. A professional woman who had successfully defended herself against 3 attackers. The first police officers to arrive were impressed by how calm and collected she appeared. Most victims of violent assault were shaking, crying, or in shock. Sarah Mitchell looked like she had just finished a difficult meeting. Detective Maria Santos, a 20-year veteran who had seen every kind of crime the D.C. area had to offer, interviewed Sarah while paramedics checked the three men for injuries. Santos had a reputation for being able to tell when someone wasn't giving her the complete truth, and something about this situation didn't add up. "Miss Mitchell, can you tell me exactly what happened here?" Sarah gave a carefully edited version of events. She had been walking to her car when three men approached her, made threatening statements about a business contract, and attempted to assault her. She had defended herself using techniques she had learned in self-defense classes. "What kind of self-defense classes?" Santos asked. "Krav Maga, mainly. Some mixed martial arts." Both technically true, if you considered military close-quarters combat training to be a form of mixed martial arts. Santos looked at the three men, all of whom were now receiving medical attention. "You took down three men by yourself?" "I was lucky," Sarah said. "They weren't expecting any resistance, and I managed to act before they could coordinate their attack." The detective's expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced, but she had no evidence that Sarah was lying. The men had clearly been the aggressors, and Sarah had every right to defend herself. Torres and Coleman both had criminal records that supported Sarah's version of events, while Rivera's accusations about foreign infiltration sounded like paranoid conspiracy theories. As the investigation continued, Sarah realized that her careful cover story was beginning to work. The police saw what they expected to see: a professional woman who had successfully fought off three would-be attackers using basic self-defense skills and good luck. The fact that her defensive actions had been executed with military precision was attributed to adrenaline and desperation. But Sarah knew that this was only the beginning. Word would spread about the incident. People would ask questions, and somewhere in the vast network of government agencies and military units that made up America's national security apparatus, someone would eventually notice that Sarah Mitchell's background didn't quite add up. Her 3 years of invisibility were over. The question now was whether she could maintain her cover long enough to figure out her next move, or whether the truth about who she really was would finally come to light. As she drove home that night, Sarah caught herself automatically checking for surveillance in her rearview mirror, a habit she had thought she had broken. Old instincts were reasserting themselves, and she realized that part of her was almost relieved that the pretense was beginning to crack. She had been a warrior living in disguise, and warriors weren't meant to hide in the shadows forever. The aftermath of the parking garage incident rippled through Sarah's carefully constructed world like cracks spreading through ice. Within 48 hours, the story had taken on a life of its own. Security footage from the garage, though grainy, showed enough detail to make it clear that Sarah's defensive actions had been extraordinarily effective. Social media buzzed with speculation about the badass defense contractor who had single-handedly defeated 3 attackers. Sarah tried to maintain normal routines, but normalcy was becoming impossible. Colleagues at Meridian looked at her differently now, with a mixture of respect and curiosity that made her uncomfortable. Tom Bradley, her supervisor, kept finding excuses to check on her, clearly struggling with questions he didn't quite know how to ask. "Sarah, I've been thinking about what happened," he said during what was supposed to be a routine project meeting. "Maybe we should look into getting you some kind of security consulting role. Someone with your skills might be valuable in a different capacity." The suggestion sent alarm bells ringing in Sarah's mind. Any role that involved security consulting would require deeper background checks, more scrutiny, and potentially contact with people who might recognize her from her previous life. She deflected with a smile and a comment about preferring analytical work, but the pressure was building from multiple directions. Rivera, despite his promise to leave her alone, had not given up his investigation. If anything, the humiliating defeat had made him more determined to discover what he saw as Sarah's secret. He had hired a private investigator, a former FBI agent named Robert Kane, who specialized in background checks for government contractors. Kane was methodical and professional, everything Rivera's thuggish approach had not been. He began by mapping Sarah's official history, looking for gaps and inconsistencies. What he found troubled him. Her college transcripts were perfect, but they showed a student who seemed to have no social life, no extracurricular activities, and no connections to other students. Her employment history before Meridian consisted of a single job at a consulting firm that had conveniently gone out of business shortly before she joined her current company. Most suspicious of all, her financial records showed a period of several months where she appeared to have no income but somehow maintained her lifestyle. The gap corresponded to what looked like extensive travel, based on credit card charges in various locations, but there was no indication of what kind of work would have required such movement. Kane shared his preliminary findings with Rivera, who became convinced that they had uncovered evidence of espionage. In his paranoid worldview, Sarah Mitchell was clearly a foreign agent who had infiltrated the defense contracting industry. He demanded that Kane dig deeper, regardless of cost. Meanwhile, Sarah was dealing with a more immediate problem. The incident had attracted attention from people whose job it was to notice unusual events involving individuals with security clearances. A routine flag had been raised in a database somewhere, and that flag had been noticed by someone who remembered a classified program from several years earlier. Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison had been the Pentagon liaison to the Experimental Women's Integration Program that had produced Sarah and a handful of other female SEALs. When the program was terminated, Morrison had been tasked with ensuring that all participants successfully transitioned to civilian life without compromising operational security. He had checked on Sarah periodically over the past 3 years, always from a distance, always ensuring that her cover remained intact. The parking garage incident had shattered that cover. Morrison knew that it was only a matter of time before someone connected the dots between Sarah Mitchell, mysterious defense contractor, and the classified program that officially never existed. He also knew that such exposure could destroy not only Sarah's life, but the lives of the other women who had participated in the program. Morrison made the decision to contact Sarah directly, something he had hoped never to do. He called her personal phone number on a Saturday morning, identifying himself with a code phrase that immediately transported her back to her military life. Lighthouse 7, this is Harbor Master. We need to meet. Oh, Sarah felt her stomach drop. Harbor Master was Morrison's operational call sign, and Lighthouse 7 was her own designation within the program. Hearing those words meant that her military past was about to collide with her civilian present in ways that could not be contained or controlled. They met at a small cafe in Georgetown, chosen because it was public enough to avoid suspicion, but private enough for sensitive conversation. Morrison looked older than Sarah remembered, the stress of managing classified programs having aged him beyond his years. He got straight to the point. "Your cover is blown," he said without preamble. "We've got private investigators asking questions, media attention, and worst of all, people in the intelligence community starting to connect dots they shouldn't be connecting." Sarah had expected this moment for 3 years, but that didn't make it any easier to hear. "What are my options?" "Limited," Morrison replied grimly. "We can try to contain the investigation, but that's becoming more difficult. The private investigator working for Rivera is good at his job, and he's starting to ask questions about the consulting firm where you supposedly worked. When he discovers that company never really existed, he's going to know something is seriously wrong with your background." Sarah stared into her coffee cup, thinking about the life she had built over the past 3 years. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. She had friends, routines, a sense of normalcy that she had never expected to find after leaving the military. The thought of losing all of that was painful in ways she hadn't anticipated. "There's another complication," Morrison continued. "Rivera has started making noise about going to the media with his conspiracy theories. If he does that, we'll have reporters investigating your background, and reporters are much harder to discourage than private investigators. What does the Pentagon want me to do?" Morrison leaned forward, lowering his voice even further. "Officially, the Pentagon doesn't know you exist. The program you were part of was classified at levels that most people don't even know exist. But unofficially, there are people who think it might be time to bring you back in." Sarah looked up sharply. "Back in how?" "There's a new unit being formed. Officially, it's a consulting group that advises on special operations policy. Unofficially, it's a place where people with your particular skills can work without having to pretend to be something they're not. You'd have a cover identity that could withstand any investigation, meaningful work, and most importantly, legal protection from people who might try to expose your past. The offer was tempting, but Sarah had learned to be suspicious of military promises. And the catch? You'd be giving up any chance of a normal civilian life. Once you're back in, even in a consulting capacity, you're in for life. No more pretending to be someone you're not, but also no more possibility of truly leaving this world behind. Sarah considered the choice Morrison was offering her. She could try to maintain her current identity and hope that the investigators eventually gave up, but that seemed increasingly unlikely. She could disappear entirely, create a new identity, and start over somewhere else. But that would mean abandoning everything she had built in Washington. Or she could step back into the world she had left behind, accept that she would always be a warrior, and find a way to serve her country without hiding who she really was. The decision was made easier by what happened next. As they sat in the cafe, Sarah noticed a man at a corner table who was paying too much attention to their conversation. He was trying to look casual, but his positioning and behavior marked him as surveillance. Sarah subtly pointed him out to Morrison, who confirmed her suspicions with a quick glance. Kane, the private investigator, had followed Sarah to the meeting. He didn't know who Morrison was, but he could tell that this was not a casual conversation between friends. He began taking pictures with a telephoto lens, capturing images of Sarah meeting with a man who was clearly military or intelligence community. Morrison noticed the surveillance at the same time Sarah did. "Decision time just got accelerated," he said quietly. "If he gets pictures of us together, it's going to raise questions we can't answer." Sarah made her choice in that moment. She was tired of hiding, tired of pretending to be less than she was, tired of living a life that felt like an elaborate lie. If her cover was going to be blown anyway, she might as well have some control over how it happened. "Set up the meeting," she told Morrison. "I want to know more about this consulting unit." Morrison nodded and stood to leave, but Sarah caught his arm. "One condition. When this is over, I want Rivera and his people to know exactly who they tried to intimidate. They spent so much effort trying to figure out who I really am. They deserve to get their answer." A week later, Sarah Mitchell officially resigned from Meridian Defense Solutions, citing personal reasons and a desire to pursue new opportunities. Her colleagues were sorry to see her go, but they understood that someone with her talents might want to take on bigger challenges. What they didn't understand was that Sarah's new job would be coordinating anti-terrorism operations in 3 continents, that her office would be in a classified facility buried 3 stories beneath the Pentagon, and that her official title would be Senior Special Operations Advisor to the Secretary of Defense. Rivera and his team never learned these details, but they did receive one final message from Sarah. It came in the form of a simple business card, delivered to Rivera's office by a courier who disappeared before anyone could ask questions. The card was expensive, understated, and bore only a name, a phone number, and a single line of text. Sarah E.P. Mitchell, former Navy SEAL. On the back of the card, in Sarah's precise handwriting, was a brief note: "Next time, do better research." Rivera stared at the card for a long time, finally understanding exactly how completely he had miscalculated. He had set out to intimidate what he thought was a weak civilian, and instead had provoked one of the most elite warriors the American military had ever produced. The irony was bitter. His investigation had been successful. He had discovered Sarah's secret. He just hadn't been prepared for what that secret would turn out to be. Kane, the private investigator, reached a similar conclusion when his research finally broke through the layers of classification protecting Sarah's military record. The few details he managed to uncover made it clear that he had been investigating someone whose service record was so classified that most generals didn't have clearance to read it. He called Rivera with his final report. "Mr. Rivera, I'm terminating our contract effective immediately. The subject of our investigation is not a foreign agent, not a criminal, and not someone you want to continue pursuing. She's a decorated American military veteran whose service record is classified at levels I don't even want to know about. My advice is to forget she exists and hope she returns the favor." Sarah's transition back into the classified world was smoother than she had expected. Her new role allowed her to use her skills and experience while maintaining enough separation from active operations that she wasn't constantly in danger. She found herself advising on training programs, reviewing operational plans, and occasionally serving as a subject matter expert on missions that required her particular expertise. More importantly, she was finally able to be herself. Her colleagues knew exactly who she was and what she was capable of. She didn't have to hide her knowledge, downplay her abilities, or pretend to be impressed by men who had accomplished far less than she had. For the first time in years, Sarah Mitchell could be Sarah Mitchell without apology or disguise. The parking garage incident that had seemed like a disaster had ultimately become her liberation. She had spent 3 years hiding from who she was, and in the end, it had taken just 15 seconds of being her true self to set her free. Sometimes the best defense really is a good offense.